What, what number is Steve? 29. Okay, good. Thank you. All right, well, good. Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to go ahead and call the Small Business Development Committee to order. And anyway, before we get started, we always like to start the day with a devotional. And I've asked Chairman Tolver to lead us in prayer this morning. So, Chairman Tolver, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we look to you for guidance in all that we do. Lead, guide, and direct. Give us wisdom to do what's best for the citizens of the state of Georgia. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, sir. All right. Well, great. The Home Builders Association are the program today. And so, Cindy, if you'd like to lead us off, do you want the chairs or the podium? Okay, that's great. Which ones? There we go. Okay. Thank you. Miss Cindy, go ahead and introduce yourself and introduce the presenters.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Cindy Morley. I'm the Director of Public Affairs for the Home Builders Association of Georgia. Today, joining me is Austin Hackney, who is our Executive Vice President of the Home Builders, and Gabe Chatham, who is one of our builders. He is also one of our officers. He is the Secretary-Treasurer this year and has joined the leadership and will be moving up the ladder. We appreciate you having us here to listen to what we're going to say about home building. I am going to give you a brief overview of the Home Builders Association, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues. Home Builders Association is a trade organization, and we are dedicated to creating, promoting, and protecting an ongoing successful environment for affordable housing in order to benefit our members and the citizens of Georgia who want to enjoy home ownership. The association is committed to offering opportunities for members to improve their abilities to conduct business with integrity. The association encourages member involvement in assisting the communities that they build in and live in. We want to meet the need for affordable, quality housing throughout the state of Georgia. We currently have around 3,500 members across the state. About half of our members are home builders. The other half are associate members who support our builders in the industry, and that we make up a large portion of the small businesses across the state of Georgia. One of our top priorities the past few years has been focused on building a workforce. We know we're losing our workforce as people age out, and we don't have as many wanting to come into the industry, so we've tried to address the issue in several ways. And that does include supporting legislation that designates additional funding for apprenticeships, internships, and dual enrollment. Very big in that. HBAG has had several initiatives of its own that address workforce development. And I'd like to just tell you about two of them. One is the Lewis Sinker Scholarship Fund, which awards scholarships to students who are pursuing a career in the home building industry, as well as awarding scholarships to career tech programs in schools across Georgia, which offer construction-related classes. These funds help pay for materials for students to use in the classroom for hands-on experience, as well as funding their competition in Skills USA. We have a lot of students that want to go compete in the Skills USA, but they just don't have the funding to pay the expenses or the materials, so we do help with that. We also, in the last 9 years, the Lewis Sinker Scholarship Fund, which is named after he was a president of Greater Atlanta, president of Georgia, and he was a national president, one of two from Georgia now. We have had Jerry Conter who did that. But the scholarship has provided more than $216,000 to students and career tech programs to help build the industry. Last year, We awarded scholarships to 4 students and 7 CTAE programs. The other program I'd like to highlight for you is our Professional Women in Building Council. This encourages, supports, and empowers women in the construction industry through professional development resources. We encourage career development, and we promote and support community involvement. For example, this past year, our PWB Council completed 2 project playhouses. It built all by women and painted, decorated, and everything. And we presented one to the YMCA Child Development Academy and one to iCare, which is a home for women and children who have been abused. We also donated the House That She Built books to Georgia County, all of their public schools. We also had members go in and read to the students about women having careers in our industry. The PWB also donates to the Lewis Sinker Scholarship. So money that they might get or raise, they donate it back to the Lewis Sinker Scholarship to help promote. So again, those are that's just a snapshot of the Home Builders Association that I wanted to present, and now I'm going to turn it over to Austin and Gabe.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present to you all this morning. The Home Builders Association of Georgia is a 3-tier organization. So, Mr. Chairman, if you were a home builder, you would join the HBA of Southwest Georgia, and your membership would kick up to us at the state level. You would go to your monthly meetings locally and do your continuing ed at those meetings, do your networking with your industry colleagues. But for us at the state organization, most of what we do is advocacy here at the Capitol. So we have legislative priorities that we pursue. We use a volunteer government affairs committee made up of builder and associate members to give us feedback on the bills and resolutions that y'all bring up or potential legislative initiatives that we want to pursue. We meet by Zoom every Thursday, and our committee members are from all around the state and all sorts of different communities and different components of the residential construction industry. So one of our biggest goals as a trade association for these member companies is to figure out how to make market rate housing more affordable to the working Georgians that want to buy a house. So some of our members work in the affordable housing space. The vast majority of our members are selling market rate housing to the average Georgian. So lots of different components that go into what makes a house more or less expensive. We try to organize those into categories like land, labor, lumber, lending, and laws. And so when we advocate for the industry here at the Capitol, there's not a whole lot that you guys as decision makers and lawmakers can do about land prices or how much more expensive lumber has gotten, the mortgage rate going up or down over the past few years. But the laws that you pass or that local governments pass really affect the price of a house in lots of different ways. And so I want to take a minute to describe, some of the impact that the laws can have on housing and what we've been doing to work on that. Number one on that list is zoning and land use regulations. Zoning laws dictate where and how residential developments can be built. Most communities in the state of Georgia have zoning laws, not all of them do. And so, as we have more development, obviously those zoning regulations get more important. But excessive restrictions, minimum lot sizes, density limits, minimum house square footage sizes, requirements for exterior architectural elements, those are all laws, ordinances locally that can increase the cost of a house. At the extreme end of the spectrum would be a zoning moratorium, a local government, pressing pause on development for a period of time, putting a stop to all building activity while they do a study of some sort, a density study, a transportation study. You guys have heard and passed out of the House Chamber House Bill 514 last year by Representative Dale Washburn that enacts some state guardrails around moratoriums that don't exist currently. So that, those guardrails, putting a limit on a zoning moratorium gives clarity to our builder members and the customers that they're trying to provide new houses for. Building codes and the permitting process are another rub with government that home builders have. Compliance with the building codes is mandatory statewide. Navigating the permit process is different in every community that has a building department. And that can impact timelines and costs, of course. Our advocacy efforts to streamline the permitting process, to standardize the building codes, to enhance coordination among different agencies, reduce those barriers to new home construction. A few years ago, 2019, House Bill 493 streamlined the private provider statutes so that if you are trying to build a new house in a community that maybe has a backlog of permit applications or has inspectors that all got COVID at the same time, which is something that that happened in 2020 where the whole staff was out of the office for weeks. A permit applicant or a home builder can apply or can get a private provider, an engineer or an architect, to do the plan review, to do the inspections that when the local staff can't do it. So House Bill 493 was a huge streamlining advancement for our industry. We're currently participating in the code adoption process at the Department of Community Affairs for the 2024 International Residential Code, which is the construction code for all new houses that's mandatory across the state. Development fees and development impact fees are hard dollar costs that are enacted by government that get passed on to a home buyer. So home builders often face substantial impact fees, which is a state program. The Impact Fee Act was passed in 1990, and that standardized it across the state. Previously different communities had been coming up with their own processes, and so that was an advancement to standardize it. But those fees do add cost to housing. They do pay for services, but if they're excessive or if they're poorly designed, they can inflate housing costs and deter new construction. So our advocacy for transparent, reasonable fee structures, strategies to incentivize infrastructure investment, which this body did last year through the Georgia Rural Workforce Housing Development Fund, that y'all put, I think, $36.5 million in last year, another 60-something million this year. So that type of incentivizing infrastructure investment is a huge help for this industry. And but the fees themselves, their House Bill 461 from last year, it was about regulatory fees and how these permit fees can be calculated. The law allows for different calculation methods. Say the most typical is the square footage method, where they look at the square footage of the house, think about how many hours their inspector is going to have to spend on that project, and that's how much your permit fee costs. What House Bill 461 is trying to get rid of is using the price of the project to determine the cost of the fee, which is really not related to how much it costs the local building department to provide that service. So, when Gabe's building a house that might cost millions of dollars versus somebody in another community building a much smaller house or even the same size house with different finishes, that shouldn't really affect the price that a homeowner is going to pay for the permit there. So House Bill 461 is important for those regulatory fees, but for impact fees specifically, those can be spent to offset the impact of the new home or the new structure or even the new individuals that live in that building, the impact that they're going to have on the community. So those fees can be spent on new roads and bridges, stormwater runoff, water treatment, and those types of public services. But it's within a very narrow allowance that the state legislature has given to local governments for how they can spend those fees. There's a bill currently in front of you, Senate Bill 208, Senate Resolution 189, that passed the House Governmental Affairs Committee yesterday, that would allow school boards to charge development impact fees on these new houses. And certainly there is an impact when a new family moves to a community and they put children in the schools. For decades, we've allowed the state funding formula and the local property taxes to cover the cost of those new schools and the operating costs for them. There's even, the sales tax option of the extra penny that could pay for new schools. This would be a totally new revenue stream, which is why it requires a constitutional amendment to allow school boards to enact these fees. But, a lot of our advocacy is, like I said, how to make a market rate house more affordable or less costly than it has to be. And these impact fees are direct costs for home buyers to pay when we've all kind of agreed to the social contract that we're going to pay for new school buildings. We're all going to do it together, whether we've got kids in school or not, and it's a benefit for everybody. So one of our goals today is to express to y'all, that new impact fees on new houses is not necessary. There are lots of revenue streams to pay for schools, and to put that burden on the backs of new home buyers just exacerbates an affordability problem that's already there.
Excuse me, I'm gonna take a point of personal privilege. And so you're telling us that Senate Bill 208 is to determine the impact of a new home on a school system. And okay. Now, I serve on the education committee as well, and I don't know if any of my other members serve on an education committee, but the school children are paid, the schools are paid by the state based on the number of schools registered. And then that's matched from the county. Can you explain to us what that impact fee is for?
So under the bill, it's to construct new school buildings in high-growth school systems. So they've got, today, the definition of a high-growth school system is, I think they had spent at least $250 million over the past 10 years, and their student population had grown 20% over the last 10 years. So it's a narrow definition today, but we've heard from lots of legislators that they'd be interested in expanding that definition to include their own school systems so that they could have a new revenue stream for new school buildings. But, our goal would be to slow that down and reiterate that there is a housing affordability crisis, and these new fees do add costs to houses when there's already revenue streams to pay for new school buildings.
Yeah, we've got one question, and I'm going to pause the presentation because I'm somewhat concerned about that.
Okay.
Senate Bill 208, who's the sponsor?
The senator is Senator Greg Dolezal. In the House, it's Representative Todd Jones.
Todd Jones?
Mm.
Okay. All right. We've got a question, Representative Chastain? There we
Yes,
go.
sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's not really a question, but just a comment on what you were talking about. Because I'd actually received an email last night from a builder in my district, Susan DuPont Carter, who's one of the largest builders. They've been there forever, concerned about this bill. And a lot of folks won't even be able to, it's a $10,000 fee. If they roll that into their mortgage, over 30 years, it'll cost the home buyer about $25,000 more for that fee. So
I appreciate the comment.
and I know the city of Cumming and Forsyth County already have very large impact fees
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
as well.
that's
So
right.
Is that true?
That is, yes. So if you build a new house in the city of Cumming in Forsyth County, which is the target for this new school impact fee, you're already paying an impact fee to the city and to the county, and so this school board fee would just stack on top of that. And
Those
today,
fees are about $5,000.
each, that's right. So today it's $45.89 for the city and $38.04 to the county.
That's right.
So, the impact fee law requires the government to see what the pro rata share of the new residents to pay for these new services is, and that's in the law already. If a new neighborhood's going to require a new road, build out a new turn lane or something, then that's part of that impact fee calculation. There's really no limit of $10,000 cap, and we can't go over that. There's nothing like that in the bill. you know, they are required to look at that pro rata share of the new cost, but you know, the advisory committee that the impact fee law requires, or members of the real estate community have to participate in this, explain what the impacts of these fees are. You know, that's useful, and certainly appreciate the original crafters of the impact fee law, including that, but there's really no requirement that the school board even take their advice. So we do continue to have some concerns with that new impact fee bill.
Okay, we lit up the board. Representative Martinez, go ahead.
I just got a question, and my biggest thing as a former city council member, former mayor, and planning and zoning board, I will be against any bill that us state will regulate what local officials do. That's why they have a county planning and zoning. That's why they have a school board. That's why they have a city planning and zoning. So I will be against us infringing on their rights to do whatever they want to do with their city, because the city of Blue Ridge may be a little different than the city of Loganville, and you know, and any other city. So, you know, I don't want to, you know, regulate anything from the state that would tell each city how to manage their planning and zoning in their particular localities.
I appreciate the comments, Representative. I can tell you about House Bill 1266 that was offered this year from Representative Dale Washburn that really, I think, took your concerns into account in the way that it incentivized local governments to adopt pro-housing policies without mandating that they did adopt a specific policy, that the state grants that communities might be applying for already would be incentivized through their process, so that, you know, that we don't preempt a local decision, that we incentivize good behavior through these grant programs. And if a community doesn't want to adopt a certain pro-housing policy under this bill, then, you know, there wouldn't be any change in their business at all. So we've definitely heard of those comments before, and this year we worked with GMA and ACCG on a task force with our colleagues at the Georgia Chamber and the Georgia Realtors Association, Habitat for Humanity. So our 6 stakeholder groups met 4 times around the state last year to talk about, you know, how we work together with the local communities and not in opposition to them. So I think that was helpful for us, and that's part of what developed that bill. But just a couple other priorities that I wanted to communicate to you today before I hand it over to Gabe to talk about his, you know, real life building experience in the field. But certainly our state license, the contractor's license, is important to everybody in our industry. There are admittedly bad actors in the building industry like there are in any other industry, so our contractor's license helps ensure on behalf of homeowners and home buyers, you know, that a contractor is qualified to do the work, that somebody is there that a homeowner can follow up with if there are questions after the job's completed. So we're focused on improving the licensing process from start to finish, meaning that the application process isn't a barrier to entry for a qualified individual, and that once a builder is licensed, we want to make sure they're not competing with the illegal work done by an unlicensed builder. So, you know, appropriate punishments for violations. Senate Bill 503 passed out of House Regulated Industries Committee last week and is going to make the first updates to our licensing law since 2004. So we think those are going to be some good clarifying changes. Some of those is just getting rid of all the grandfathering language from the original implementation of the license. Some of it is board governance and streamlining that process. One of the items in that bill is just raising the fine from $500 to $1,000 for violating the statute. And so all this comes together for housing affordability and accessibility. We, as Cindy mentioned, promote our workforce development. We work on all sorts of different advocacy issues here at the Capitol, and the goal, as I said at the start, is to how to make market rate housing more affordable, or at least less costly than it it has to be. So with that said, I want to introduce Gabe Chatham as one of our officers of the association this year and a home builder here in Metro Atlanta, and let him make some comments to the group.
Sure. Well, first off, thank you for the invitation, and we're certainly appreciative for all that you elected officials do for us and represent your communities. And I know just from friends in similar positions, you get calls from everything. There's a cat in the tree to some major crisis, and most of those items aren't within your purview, but you figure out how to help those folks and take care of your constituents. So thank you for what you do. For us in the home building industry, it's we've got thousands of members, as Cindy mentioned, within the association. But what's really deceiving is, for instance, my lumber company that we buy lumber from and siding from, they employ close to 400 people, but that's one member. So sometimes that can be a little bit deceiving, how many folks are a part of what we do as an industry. So I have the privilege of being part of the third generation of our family business. So last year we celebrated 75 years. And my granddad, Howard Chatham, grew up as a sharecropper, northwest Fulton, Cherokee, Forsyth areas. And I came back from World War II and met my grandmother. Started working, laying out some bridges and roads for Fulton County, and bought an acre from his in-laws, old hog farm, Hardeman Road, here in locally in Buckhead, which was kind of way out in the sticks at the time. And so he was building a house with a mule and a scoop, and my grandmother, they had one car in the family. They'd shine the headlights into the foundation, and they'd dig that out. And a similar family came by that had just gotten married, World War II veteran, similar story, and wanted to buy it. He said, no, it's for us. And they said, I came back the next day, said, no, we're serious. So my grandfather and grandmother spoke about it, and for about $6,000 sold a house on Hardeman Road in Buckhead. And we're able to get another acre next door. And 3 times over that happened. So Granddad, really said, all right, I'm going to trust the Lord here. We're going to step out on faith, and we're going to start building houses. And I went to his employer, which was Fulton County, on the engineering side, and said, hey, I'm going to quit and start building houses. And they said, well, you'll be back. We'll just give you a leave of absence. But as he got going, he realized the opportunity was there, and many similar folks who were coming back from World War II and needed a place to live. So he ended up renting the basement on the first house because he said, I got to get out of my in-laws' house. I love them, but we got to move out. And so that's kind of where that story began. The mid-50s, he had some inventory and realized he couldn't do everything. He couldn't develop, build, and sell these houses. So he started a brokerage company called Northside Realty, which grew at the time to be the largest privately held company in the Southeast. And he couldn't broker it himself, so his first real broker that he hired was an up-and-coming broker named Ed Isaacson. And so Ed, as he began to lead the company, said, my son Johnny's graduating from UGA here in, I believe it was 1968, and we need to start an East Cobb office. So his son Johnny, right out of school, opened up the East Cobb office. And so Northside Realty ran until the early 90s, until that was all sold off. And obviously Johnny had bigger and better things to do than sell real estate in Atlanta, but we're thankful for what he's done for our industry, obviously. But what? Yes, sir. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, in fact, at my granddad's funeral, I got to preach as well as Mr. Isaacson came down from D.C. to be a part of that. So it was a sweet day to honor him. So, one of the things that I love about our general business is it is incredibly entrepreneurial. And you think about all the different people who are involved in the home building process, and we're involved not just as builders, but also developers. We're in the real estate business as well. We have close to 2,000 agents in our various Keller Williams offices in the north part of Atlanta, including the number 1 office in the world that's based out of Alpharetta. And as a kid, after church, my dad and granddad would say, hey, let's run by this neighborhood and let's go take a look and see how we're doing. It was like, no, we want to get home, my brothers and I, and play. And so for myself and my 2 younger brothers, we enjoyed being around it, but didn't have a ton of interest. But when I was home during college, I spent a little time with my dad riding around checking neighborhoods. And as we're driving down the street, there are hundreds of people working. There's phases of a development that are being actively developed. You have framing carpenters and roofers, and you've got folks pouring driveways. And so you looked around and thought, my goodness, this has an enormous impact. And so for me, that was a turning point to say, hey, there's really something here. It's not just about us trying to make a living and provide for our families and invest in our communities, but there's a much bigger picture of how many folks are employed. And obviously, we're not directly employing all those folks, but for a season, all those people have a job working on these projects with home builders and developers. And so that's what's fun, is to see the entrepreneurial nature of how many of these folks, whether they're, and I won't speak for the realtors, I know they'll have their own voice, but that world as well. there's a lot of risk taking, a lot of hustle that has to happen, a lot of creativity for people in this home building and development business to make it. And so, we see a lot of challenges. One of the interesting stats nationally that we see from really good research from our national association is that close to 25% of the cost of a finished home is in governmental fees. And we've done great research here. Our great HBAG staff here in Georgia has done our own research and realized it's closer to 29% here in the state of Georgia. And so, for us, we realize that's not in quartz countertops. It's not in a special type of hardy plank siding. That's in governmental fees that we can't truly pass that value on to the client or the customer. And so, for us, we see that as a challenge. Obviously, some of those layers are incredibly necessary, and we fully support those things because we want quality housing. And as Austin mentioned, there's always a couple of bad actors in different industries, but as us as the association, obviously we strive for excellent in creating housing and home ownership in our industry. So as you mentioned, there's a lot of different aspects that go into some of the things that we're challenged with. Trees, for instance, every municipality is a little different on trees, but in some cases, trees, as much as we love them and as beautiful as they are, the challenges of working around a tree or trying to create tree recompense can be such a challenge that I jokingly say the tree owns the lot, not the individual, because there's so much value in trying to take that tree down that essentially it's not even worth the value of the lot, which is obviously a challenge. But again, we're entrepreneurial again as an industry and work around some of those challenges. But I think Austin spoke specifically to the impact fee issues, and we're certainly in the markets where some of the folks that are working on that legislation are from, and so we see that certainly as a challenge, and trying to find attainable housing, trying to find housing for folks, create that are working in all these great areas. We're creating so many great jobs across the state, and again, kudos to all of our elected officials a part of that. But trying to create places where these folks can live is a unique challenge, and so I know much of that falls to local municipalities, but we're certainly appreciative of whatever support or insight you men and women from the state level can help us with. So, if nothing else, we're certainly thankful for a seat at the table, if you will, for the invitation. And I know our great staff of Austin and Cindy are here to be a part of that conversation. But we as local practitioners, really want to engage too and give you some real world examples. And I know you probably hear from builders that are in your particular markets, but we want to really be a part of that solution and process and give you some insight, because we all know all legislation comes from a good place, trying to create something quality for our state and our local areas. But sometimes when the rubber meets the road, those well-intentioned pieces of legislation can maybe adversely affect things like home ownership and creating opportunities for future generations to have a place to own. And we hear it time and time again, whether it's the real estate side or the home building side, that we really want to live in these areas. We want to try to find some place that we can go, but there's just not enough inventory, and there's certainly not affordability. And, for us, we know from just anecdotally and our own experience that in areas where there's a high level of home ownership, there oftentimes appears to be a different level of investment in that community. And we really want to help create that, because we want stronger communities certainly across the board, and great places to live and to play and to worship and to be a part of some neat things in our community. So as a lifelong Georgian, and all my family from every direction from the generally this area, again, we're thankful for your participation in this process, and thanks for an invitation today.
Cool. Well, great. We've got a question or two. I know I've got a couple of them. We'll answer. Representative Chastain, I'll let you go ahead and ask your question. You've been very patient.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess since it's just you and I, we can ask all the questions. I just have a couple, but of course, I live up in Blue Ridge, so we're heavily dependent upon real estate, building, have been for many, many years. And I work for a bank up there, United Community Bank. I've worked for them for 32 years, but I'm trying to help some of our folks go through the building license process, because a lot of banks, there's still a few very small community banks that will allow them to build without the license. But your mid-sized banks, and when you get out of the rural, most of these banks are requiring their builders to have a license. But and this Senate bill that you just mentioned might have already took care of the question I'm going to ask. But number one, the building license process, seems like I've been involved in some of these. It seems like that's taking a long, long time to get them from start to finish through all that. If you could comment a little bit on that. And also, would the Georgia Home Builders Association be supportive? I asked this question last year too, by the way, Mr. Chairman, but we have, not a lot, but we have several builders in my district with Gilmer County, Fannin, and part of Dawson that are extremely great builders. 20-year, second generation, can read do the whole thing, and they're never going to get a license. Is there any pathway, equal conversion? I know you mentioned grandfather, but because I've talked to them, and they're not going to take the time. They're just not going to do it, and they're extremely good builders, been in the business for many, many, many years. And I'm trying to work through them because when these folks are moving to Blue Ridge, they're coming up and they're getting these builders because they're by referral because they're so good. Mm-hmm. And if they need financing, if it's a cash deal, it's cool. They can, in our counties. But if they need financing and they come to United Community Bank, then we put a fairly hard stop on that license versus non-license.
Well, I would say if they intend to get licensed, now is the time, because this Senate bill does get rid of those grandfathering opportunities. So, when the bill went into effect, the grandfathering was a big part of that, where a builder who could show that work experience and those referrals that it sounds like those builders have, wouldn't have to go through the testing component because they've got the real world experience. So. I think this bill, Senate Bill 503, would get rid of some of those grandfathering opportunities. So if they are going to get licensed, now is the time. I think the license itself, as I mentioned, is, for the first part of your question, it does take a long time. There's no dancing around that, and that could be a couple of different reasons, but it sounds like the most likely is just a lack of resources at the Secretary's office for staff to administer these applications. And, the members of the licensing board are usually professionals like Gabe who, have a full-time job that makes them more money than the per diem for driving to Macon to do the licensing board meetings could pay. So there's not a whole lot of incentive for a qualified, active builder to go that route. So for our volunteers that are on that board, they got a lot of work to do. And it's not just the applicants, it's the violations that they've got to review and dole out the punishments. And so, we ask those licensing boards to do a lot with very little resources, which I think leads to the issues that you're running into. But for the unlicensed guys, it's like we said, that license requirement's been there since 2004. So if they hadn't done it yet, they may never do it.
Thank you. I do want to make another point of personal privilege. Mark Woodall is here, and I didn't know if he wanted to raise his hand and say something, or just sit in the background and be quiet.
There's two Mark Woodalls here. The guy over here gets me in a lot of trouble. No, we have a fantastic relationship with the Home Builders Association. Representative, to give some context, both the Home Builders Association 20-some odd years ago and Associated General Contractors, who represent commercial general contractors, were adamantly opposed to licensure. But what began to happen in the state, every state that touched Georgia had a license requirement. Florida, Alabama, Tennessee, South Carolina. So they could come over here and work without having to have a license, but we had to have one when we went to Tallahassee or we went to Alabama, all those places. So what began to happen in Georgia, there were multiple local ordinances at the county level that required licensure, but no reciprocity within the state of Georgia. So both organizations went back to their members and said, y'all, which is less government, a single statewide license or having to have 159 county licenses? So that's how we got there. We had a bill, they had a bill. General Assembly told us we weren't doing it twice, threw us into a shotgun marriage, and we've been operating successfully under that legislation for 20-some odd years. And Senate Bill 503 is the legislation to get rid of the grandfathering language and some other stuff that hasn't been valid for years.
Cool.
Thanks.
Mark, thank you. I appreciate those comments and clarification. I appreciate what y'all do with the Skills USA and the dual enrollment and the scholarships that y'all are offering to encourage kids to get in the industry. It's an exciting industry, to be honest with you. I was years ago a developer myself, and so I know the challenges that you face. I like the way you put it: land, labor, lumber, lending, and laws, and that just about covers everything. Dale Washburn has been a champion for affordable housing and for the real estate industry. And he's gone above and beyond, if you ask me, to get some movement in the areas that affect your industry. We've got huge push in economic development to attract industry, and we're realizing that we don't have the affordable housing available to supply that industry with the workforce that they need. The question that I want to propose is, when y'all make investments in buying land, getting infrastructure, sewer, stormwater, all that kind of stuff, are there any economic development incentives for you guys along the same line as we offer the industries that come? I mean, has that been something that is discussed? I don't know of any, but it may be my ignorance.
So I mentioned the Georgia Rural Workforce Housing Development Program, and like I said, that's got an additional 60-something million in this year's budget. So that money is to be spent on the infrastructure development that you mentioned, for just that workforce housing product. And local governments around the state apply for these grant dollars, and they pull it in and do that underground infrastructure development. GFA got an additional $200 million for infrastructure development in this year's budget. So those are the types of state investments into residential real estate development that I think are new, and we're still figuring out, how that workforce housing development fund is going to impact the types of projects that are available. I think typically government investment into housing goes into the demand side of the equation, and we help renters cover their rent, or the Section 8 voucher, or that type of thing. That's on the kind of the demand side. On the supply side, this new investment into the infrastructure is going to have an impact. I think we're still waiting to see what that is. And there are tax credits for things like historic rehabilitation, even for residential buildings. And so the low-income housing tax credit that the state has a matching amount that just matches the federal program, that's typically just for the multifamily development. So we haven't expanded that into like a single-family workforce housing product yet, but certainly that could have an impact on this industry.
Are y'all
as well.
working in that direction, trying to get a single family? Because that's been the American dream for our citizens to own their own home. And home ownership, in my opinion, is the cornerstone of what makes this country so great. Property ownership, you look at it from revenue stream for local governments. You look at it from asset development for the owners. You look at it as stability in schools and growth and so forth. So, that little nucleus, in my opinion, plays a great role. And I would like to see more incentives for developers when we go out and attract a huge industry to come to our communities. So I was just curious about that.
I think it's a great direction that we can strive in, just to be a part of the process at Department of Economic Development, just to give our input into, what type of housing needs this giant new economic development is going to require. So Yeah.
Is there communication between you and the Department of Economic Development? Is there,
I'd say those conversations are probably happening more locally in the communities, you know, that are actually experiencing that growth and development. So for the state level, I wouldn't say that our association has inserted ourselves into that process yet.
Gotcha. Well, Johnny, it looks like it's me and you. Have you got any more questions?
Good, Mr. Chairman.
You're good. Well, before we finish, Mark, did you want
I
to?
add one thing to that last
Yeah, come on.
And I'm not sure how prevalent it is for the residential market, but we've got some huge projects, development projects in this state, Hyundai, Rivian, all this stuff. Our number 1, 2, and 3 biggest issue is workforce.
Yeah.
We do not have the skilled labor to do the projects that we're getting. And so we're doing everything we can to address that.
Cool. Gotcha. You're right. Well, before we adjourn, I want to introduce one guest. Hank Brady, stand up. I appreciate you coming by. A personal friend, and he came by. We're working with a consulting firm, I guess. CKH. Anyway, so thank you for being here. All right. Well, thank you for your presentation. It was very enlightening, and maybe we can get some things done. I want to find out personally what's going on with SB 208, and then we can talk further. But thank you for your presentation. We appreciate y'all being here. Thank you for the work that y'all do. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.